Good evening, I'm John Allen. Tonight, we're in Mandera County, the scene of so much loss and so many bullets. This is Perspective, and the show starts right now. There is panic in the air over the deteriorating security situation countrywide. And the state of security is the focus of our first segment of the show, Headline versus Bottom Line. This week's headline: police and security agents grapple with killings in Bungoma, Mandera, Tana River and Garissa, and gang-related robberies in Kitengela. But here's the bottom line. Whereas Kenya's security forces seem overstretched, the effectiveness of the police is only as good as the intelligence it gets. Are the officers of the National Intelligence Services doing their jobs in giving other security services the information they need to preempt violence or act quickly once violence occurs? Judging by the vacuum of information around what's happening in Bungoma, the NIS has a long way to go in helping the police to cope with Kenya's security challenges. That's headline versus bottom line for this week. But remember to tell us which headline you think we should focus on for next week's show. You can tweet us on @KTN Perspective or leave your comments on KTN's Facebook page. Our main feature this week is about insecurity in a part of the country that often doesn't get any coverage at all. The recent fighting in Ramu in Mandera County has left behind it scenes reminiscent of the country's neighbor to the east, Somalia. But the story isn't that the violence took place over the past few days. The inter-clan violence has been raging for 3 months. Tonight we bring you the shocking aftermath of the war that you didn't see. There's a Somali saying that goes, "Death is okay with anybody you don't know and a camel herder." Its meaning, from what I'm told, is that the sting of loss from death isn't felt by strangers to the person who died. The saying, though simple, asks one of the most existential questions about ourselves. How do you grieve for a person you didn't know? Conversely, our shared conscience has a way of connecting us all, so that we, even in some small way, are affected by suffering of fellow men and women. Under the same sky in Kenya, that common bond is alive and well. Empathy and understanding is not new to the Kenyan man. But for that empathy to even be felt, one has to know that his fellow man somewhere is suffering. Under the same sky in Kenya, there are many things that have happened over the past 3 months that many in the public do not know. This is perhaps one of the few clips of video footage that exist, recording part of what has been happening in many parts of Mandera County. It was recorded in Ramu town on the afternoon of February the 27th, 2013. We received it from a government officer working there, a person who only talked to us on condition of anonymity. In this clip, we hear an officer talking to those trying to put out the fire. With no options, the officer suggests the most practical solution to something he cannot control. What this clip doesn't capture is the officer's resignation to the magnitude of a conflict he sees unfolding in front of him. Picture a shop in a town that's close to Kenya's administration. What if that shop was set on fire because of violence? How long would it take the government to respond, especially if that shop was lying right next to that town's main thoroughfare? Now think of 2 shops. Picture 5 even, 10, 15. Think of 20 shops on fire. Now think of 1/3 of that town's business district alight. How long do you think that the government would take to respond to such a crisis? The army was called into Ramu to quell the violence. But all it and the police did was to ensure that a lull in that violence would ensue.
We have 2 major causes. One is political. Second, we have clanism. There is a lot of hatred between the clans that reside in the county, and particularly between the Degodia and the Gare.
The hatred still bleeds out in images comparable to those that Kenyans saw in the aftermath of a disputed presidential election in 2008. The town is a shadow of its former self.
Sisi, hata kama kijana mmoja anapaki, sisi kutoka. Hatutoka hata kama mmoja anapaki tunapigana na hawa.
Waxay joogaan Mandera. Meesha la dhahaa suuq xoolaha.
And whether one is from the Gare or Degodia clan, the vapors of more violence hang heavy in Ramu town.
Pesa yake milioni 4 shilingi 500.
65-year-old Golo Mohammed's eyes sift through what used to be a line of 5 shops that he built over decades.
And here we used to have a cyber for computer studies here.
And standing on the slab of what was to be his inheritance, Golo's son, Hussein, remembers the day that his father's business came crashing down. Golo and his son Hussein both point out something that we hear about more and more in our visit to the region.
I was putting off some neighboring houses here like this. There are some shops. I was there. Yeah.
And someone came and...
Someone came. Some people are carrying petrols. Others are carrying paraffins. You can see they were using fuels in order to light it on. But that day I was here. When you can see there was fire was being lit and how it started. I even saw it with my eyes, with my naked eyes. Someone carrying a gun, shooting others, doing all those things, running at one side. I have witnessed that.
Aliyo rasasi sisi ni raia tunataka kuhamia DC, lakini tunasikia mlio tunasikia rasasi tunasikia.
Be they Gare like Golo and Hussein,
kabila nyingine ndio mmetufamia,
or Degodia like 46-year-old Hassan Farah, everyone here admits that there are 2 groups that are far more dangerous than the average civilian.
Is it a fact that there are 2 militias in this county, one Gare and one Degodia?
Yes, it is a fact, and we are not hiding it. We are not denying anything.
From what you've been told, how well armed are these militias?
They are well armed. They have sophisticated weapons.
They are militias of both groups. We talk of the Republic of Kenya, where we do have militias. The last time when we came for a peace mission and we were in Banissa, the DC himself told me, look, there's a group here who is more armed than us, and we can't go to them.
I've heard of allegations of there being a Degodia militia. Is there one from the Gare community, have you heard?
From Gare community? The way I can see.
Conversations become strained if you ask which militia group did what. Everybody gives an answer that favors the cause of their clan.
nin la aqaan ma laha ilmo oo meel kale ka imaaday dhulka dhaxdiisa dadka ku dhashay ma gubin waa dad mooyaale meelahaas ka imaaday
qafyo wale ma kuna milisha oo bana dhoka haba bauna julikana ya idu gujahi uyu gambo hapa ni karibu sio mbali usiku tatu kulala wa taskara sasa leo usiku kulala hapa taskara sasa bandi kutoka hiyo sasa sadi kile usiku wana pia sasa tunasikia uchana wanachina hapa wanafanya biashara kwa tu usiku wanafuka.
Proof of their existence has been confined to eyewitness reports and the bitter harvest of destroyed villages and a piling body count on both sides.
There are crude weapons like panga, stones and others have been used. Also there are some gunshot wounds which are also there.
At the Ramu Sub-District Hospital, Medical Superintendent Mohammed Mukhtar Suka tells us of a curious occurrence days after the violence started.
On the first evening also, a body of a young man who was thought to be a militia was brought to the hospital by a police van, of which both communities denied to claim that, both denied that he or she is not belonging to the Mgari community, denied, Dogodia denied.
The communities may be reluctant to expose their own groups, but the groups haven't been shy in exposing themselves. This video has been widely distributed to members of the Gare community. The fighters in it are part of a militia group that defends them. And in this video, which we received from confidential sources, reveals that the Degodia too have a very well-armed militia waiting in the wings. In both videos, you see many similarities. The most common weapon being AK-47 assault weapons or G3 assault rifles. The two groups, we are told by police officers on the ground, also have rocket-propelled grenade launchers and anti-tank machine guns. While not represented on the videos, both groups number in the hundreds and have strong ties to Kenya's neighbor to the north, Ethiopia. The two militia groups formed as a result of inter-clan conflicts between the same two sub-clans of the Somali community in Ethiopia. But as the conflicts there deepened, they came across the border, and since the year 2011, these groups have played a major role in every tribal confrontation there. The group's numbers are strongest in the areas where their communities are in the majority. The Dogodia militia group has high numbers on the Ethiopian side of the Kenya-Ethiopia border near the villages of Malkamari and Ramu, while the Gare militia group is strongest across the borders of Mandera town, Elwak and Moyale in Marsabit County. Both militia groups though, according to the information both we and the government gathered, are also heavily represented in the towns that have become flashpoints in this conflict. Ramu, for instance, proved to be a town that the police had misread tactically as far as planning went.
When the conflicts started, we had very few officers stationed at Ramu. And when we never expected that there were militias actually inside Ramu town. The militias that we were anticipating to get were from the Ethiopian side and also from Elwak side. Little did we know that people inside the town had sophisticated weapons.
That though is information that no one community is willing to give objectively. All each group wants is for the parts of the town where they incurred the heaviest damage to be shown at the expense of the other community. Suspicion of each other and even of our own presence is palpable. As we filmed the damage on our first evening in Ramu town, we got mobbed by what seemed to be at first curious onlookers. We found ourselves having to explain to a crowd of increasingly agitated men, all from one community, that our presence there was not to misrepresent what happened.
What are you saying? What are you saying exactly? That someone has informed me of what exactly?
Who has updated you that there's houses burned in this area? In short.
Now let me explain. Sisi tuliona wacha tubaki, tuangalie side zote, tusiangalie tu side ya Degodia. Tuangalie ya Gare, tuangalie ya Murule, kila mtu ambaye aliathirika tuangalie ili tujue. Hakuna Mkenya anajua hii taarifa hii kitu ilifanyika.
We would have to stop rolling for the day. Dusk had fallen and members of both communities advised us to stay indoors. We'd have to wait for sunrise to see for ourselves the full extent of the destruction here. And for a conflict that went unreported for 3 months, what we saw was incredible. The blackened walls from houses set on fire. Houses stand stripped naked, almost as if they're ashamed to still be standing. Innocence was lost in these homes. Petrol bombs and grenades, we're told, set the tone for the violence here. And bullet-riddled walls sent the message home that this was a fight to the death for many on both sides of the divide. On walls where family portraits had probably been hung, you see war graffiti. In houses attacked by the Gare, filthy language describes the Degodia. On the walls of a destroyed Gare home, the same derogatory language is appended. It's obvious. The mistrust and a deep hatred was the seed planted in the hearts of those who perpetrated these attacks, and it's spreading to civilians that once lived in peace, side by side.
A shameful state of affairs in Mandera. The violence, though, wasn't restricted to the main towns. We go to the villages and give you the political context to a bitter clan rivalry. Stay with Perspective.
The ruckus of a football game underway is a welcome break from the tension weighing down Ramu town. We find these young boys going at it. Then we're reminded that this was supposed to be the first day back at school for many of them, and their choice of a field jolts us back into the reality of where we are. This is Ramu's main market. Only you can't call it that anymore, because a market has people in it.
If you're a trader and you lived in a Mandera North region, then it's most likely that you'd come to buy or sell your things here at the Ramu market. But since the conflict began, the shelves have been empty, and that's been 3 months now. If you're Degodia now, or if you're Gare, you'd have to go to a market where your tribesmen buy and sell. And that says something about this conflict, because even in the conflicts that took place before this one, this market never closed, not once. It feels as if an invisible line has been crossed. But whether both tribes will be able to pull back from it this time around is really anybody's guess.
"46-year-old Bishara Dakat used to run a restaurant that depended on the milk traded at this market. Now she makes her tea from milk purchased in the Degodia market. It's still just as good, but the memories that haunt her from when she lost her old shop leave a bitter aftertaste. The partitions of her makeshift restaurant today are burnt corrugated iron sheets, which were the roof of her old shop. 3 months after the violence, she's just getting back onto her feet.
كل ويسهلعن على البرافيه كل ويهلعن لكن هذا وحن كهاي مالها مشان هذا سكفليا dhibaatada waxay gaarin taasoo lacag waa iga gubatay taasoo waxa way iga gubatay ilmaha yaani certificate-kooda ilmaha iskuulka ay ku akhrisanayeen kulli way iga gubteen waxaan kala soo baxay mala gambiskayga iyo dharkayga ma way ilmaha kala soo baxeen igoo saan yaa intuu qulmo qaraabo una ay waday.
She's one of the hundreds of business people whose lives were trapped in the fog of a tribal war. A fog which lifted, leaving Ismail Mohammed Noor in the same place as Bishara. He used to sit in the chair that he now lifts out of the rubble, making clothes for people from both communities. Ismail is Gare, but his loss and hers are the same. But they share more in common than just loss. The conflict between the Gare and the Dagodia may be a fierce one, but from the perspective of tribe, it really is a fight between two brothers. The Somali people all have a shared ancestry and are spread throughout the Horn of Africa. Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia and Djibouti are countries to which the Somali are native. The clans of the Somali are diverse, but they all trace a common ancestry back to 5 main clans: the Darod, the Dir, the Isak, the Digil and Mirfile, and the Hawiye. The Gare and the Dagodia are actually subclans under the Hawiye clan, along with well over 10 other subclans. They are much closer in their ethnicity than these divisions could ever suggest. But political contests have a way of driving a deadly wedge between even the closest of relatives. Depending on who you ask, it was the Dagodia that struck the first match, or the Gare that attacked first. A reading of the history of violence in Mandera and the north would suggest that another cause for the violence is resources, the fight over pasture. That is not the case in Mandera at this time. River Dawa, the semi-permanent water body that snakes through parts of the county, is full. There may be dry riverbeds in parts of the county, but they are rimmed by a lush, deep green foliage that transports one to images of a vast Eden. Herds are healthy, and there is enough for everyone's needs. Even if, in a not too distant future, the sun and the earth will claim this fertility. Yet in the villages we travel to, the green overgrowth does little to hide the evidence of a conflict that burned through parts of the county that the government didn't reach.
If you've never heard of the village Malkaroka and you're a Kenyan, then you're probably amongst a majority of Kenyans who haven't. This is a small village of about 400 people on the Kenyan-Ethiopian border, subsisting mostly on food aid during famine and the dry season, like many other villages across this county. Yet, during the pre- and post-election violence that rocked parts of this county, this was an epicenter. But rather than wait for the government to come and help them rebuild their lives after their homes were torched, the people who are evicted from here have never returned. Because to them, waiting for the government to come and help them rebuild their lives is about as futile or useless as having a house with a doorway, one wall, and no roof.
The further away from Mandera one goes, the slower the government response is to incidents that take place here. All those under siege can do is run. Malkamari on the Kenyan-Ethiopian border is a town that knows this well.
Now the villagers here have had to contend with bullets flying over their heads every day. We spent the night here, and since coming here we've heard at least 3 short bursts of gunfire coming from that direction. That is the front line, where 2 militia groups have clashed and clash very often.
Walking down the main street of this town, you can see just how many of the villagers that lived here couldn't take it anymore. Padlock after padlock, door after door. The constant threat that either one of the militia groups could march into town was perhaps too much to take. Here too, the graves of those who were killed are watched over by the bereaved. But in this conflict, the dignity of a burial isn't always guaranteed. 16-year-old Zainab Ahmed is a shy, reclusive young lady, but she is now the second oldest member of her household after the disappearance of her father. In December 2011, her father left for the farm with a number of neighbors. The report that returned in his place was that there was a confrontation, some shots were fired, and Zainab's father was never seen again.
Our father, we don't know what happened to him, and still he's taken to there. He was taken there because we don't know even know whether he's died or not. these people are enemy, and every time they come in here to see these people that they want to, are they ready to begin or what?
It's been more than a year since the patriarch of this house disappeared, but even as seasons changed, the feeling of defenselessness has stayed with them and many more here. There are security forces here, and one officer speaks to me on condition of anonymity.
When you got weapons in the wrong hands, they are capable of doing anything at the discretion of the one who holds them. I would just say they are dangerous weapons.
But what he doesn't dare say, even with his back to the camera, is that security officers here know exactly where the militia groups are, but would not dare confront them. In ammunition and in some respects, in training, the militia groups from both sides match Kenya's security forces.
The government, 2 or 3 years ago, tried actually to help the Somalian government. And some young men were recruited from Kenya, taken to Somalia, and they were trained. Some were trained, but they never went to Ethiopia. So they did Somalia, but they remained here. So they have the training, they can handle the arms, and they have the military training. So we are also investigating them.
Michael Tialal, the county commissioner for Mandera County, is a man who has seen past and present conflicts develop in Mandera, his first posting to the region being in 2007. The conflict, he says, came out of the belief by both communities of their right to belong exclusively to the region, to the other community's exclusion. When the Independent Boundaries Commission sought the views of people in the county on the delineation of new administrative boundaries, the outcome actually reinforced this view, especially in what used to be known as Mandera's Central Constituency.
The Gare regarded the Dogodia as immigrants, that they came just the other day from Somalia and then Ethiopia, and some of them they also came from Wajir. The Dogodia fought for the creation of that constituency. Yeah, so when it was created, they thought the constituency was created for them, and they never wanted the Gare to come, or any other community to fire for that seat. Both clans tried their level best to ensure that they get the seat. For example, the Gare brought voters from all over Kenya, and even the Gares who were in South Africa and other countries came back home, and they registered in Mandera North so that they could get that seat. The Dogodia also ensured that they bring their clansmen all the way from Wajir, Ethiopia, and other parts of this country, and even outside. All of them came to register so that they could have numbers to get the seat. So unfortunately, conflicts flared up just before the elections.
The current political leadership of Mandera is composed solely of leaders from the Gare community, from the governor to senator to members of parliament. Some Dogodia elders claim that their supporters were forced to flee when the violence began, something that Tialal disputes.
Both clans actually displaced one another. Yeah, even before the elections, I tried a lot. I went out of my way. We brought them together, and we told them to sit with the two communities. We told them to come on a negotiation table. Let them discuss and share the seats and negotiate a democracy. But they refused.
Now the seeds of a bitter rivalry have germinated. Conflict is consuming the hopes and aspirations of hundreds of thousands of people, and both militia groups are becoming difficult to control. criminals who are striking hard and often, with a lucky few who escape their crosshairs too traumatized to talk. We left Ramu on Thursday, May the 7th. On May the 8th, 9th and 10th, we received information of heavy fighting in Ramu town. According to our sources from within the police force, military-grade weaponry was being used in the fighting. 2 people died in that latest incident, bringing the official tally of those dead since February to 7. The actual number, according to both sides, is much higher. On Saturday, the 11th of May, political leaders from both the Dagodia and Gare communities met with Deputy President William Ruto over the clashes. The military will soon be deployed to fight the militia groups in Mandera County, with hints of a forced disarmament of the many armed civilians in the county to follow.
We have agreed that peace is paramount, that we must have peace in that county.
Within the existence of a country with a government, we cannot have militias ruling a county from both sides. And we like them to take this initiative and willfully disarm and go back to wherever they've come from in order for us to start building the nation.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
What has been missing from this conflict, though, are the reminders of what these two communities share: a faith that abhors the violence that was witnessed here, a proud ancestry and heritage that ought to overcome all divisions, and somewhere in them, a hope for peace that can be nursed even in the most dire of circumstances.
nidayda sida ku jirta hadda saasaan filahayaa col wax istara ma laha nabada naas linuuga leh col wax istara ma laha walaalo.
This was a war that Kenya didn't see, taking place on the same soil that Kenyans from other parts of the country walk on. Yet the same hope that is nursed for peace in Mandera must be a shared one. Because no matter what part of the country each of those who suffer come from, they are all Kenyans living under the same sky.
This week on Your Perspective, we're asking what can be done to resolve the security crisis in the country. Here are some of your thoughts.
Serikali lazima labda iongeze askari wawe kwa wingi ili waweze kulinda raia kwa njia iliyo sawa. Hasa tukiangalia vituo vya polisi viko mbali sana. Natakikana kituo kama itengeneze vieko karibu na askari wawe wako standby.
Fadhali turegelee ule mfumo wa mzee Daniel Moi. Mapolisi wanafaa kukaa kama kwenye station, wakae kama ni miezi mitatu na kuhamishwa.
That's it for this week's episode of Perspective. But remember to send us your feedback as well as any topics you think we should focus on. Tweet us on @KTN Perspective or tweet me on @JohnAlanamu. We'll put your week in perspective next week. I'm John Alanamu. Good night and stay safe.